Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Observation Conversations. My name is Reid,
And I'm Jonathan.
and today we're finally going to talk about Loki. It's out. We've been waiting for it. We've been talking about it since we talked about WandaVision, which admittedly was like an episode ago. Well, no, it was our first episode.
Yeah, 2 episodes ago.
Yeah, but the two of us have been waiting for this show
Oh
since
my
the
goodness.
trailer dropped. Oh my God. And
Yeah.
man, did it deliver.
Yeah, Loki was fantastic. This was easily one of my most anticipated shows of the year. Um and boy, we just got the first episode, Glorious Purpose. It released yesterday, June 9th, and I love it.
It's
It's
so
it's
good.
it's
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 so good.
phenomenal. It was a great first episode, and I'm so excited for the potential that it sets up for the rest of the series. Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk
Yeah,
about.
I think we just need to dive right in. So
Yeah.
so where do we open?
Well. First, I just want to give a little bit of background. Just kind of let's set the groundwork for where we are so far with Marvel on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
Earlier in the winter, we had WandaVision, which was this brilliant kind of psychological puzzle box mystery, wrapped within this really just incredibly well thought out like ode to television. We got this series that it did a great tribute to each decade of sitcom television over the course of its 9 episodes. And then in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we got a very much more traditional kind of buddy action, not even so much a series as it is like an extended movie, like a movie
Yeah.
extended over the course of 5 hours, 6 hours. And it was also quite good. I would say not quite at the heights of WandaVision, but it did its job very well. And now with Loki, we have this really, it almost defies classification. It's a twisty sci-fi time travel thriller comedy, um, yeah,
Yeah.
featuring superheroes. And so I just wanted to say this up front because I love how we're getting something so different each time. And whereas in the other two series, that gave extra depth to corners of the MCU that we haven't really explored before. In both cases, WandaVision, Falcon and Winter Soldier, we were kind of diving into the lives of, I don't want to say B team, but more periphery Avengers. Like they're there, but they're
Yeah.
never the main attraction. This is the
Well,
first
they are
time.
now.
Exactly. Yeah,
They're the new Avengers, so
exactly. Yeah, they're the main attractions now that they're featured in their own shows, and they really get a chance to have some of the spotlight on them. But this is the first time we're diving into the life of a villain. And I say villain and not former villain because, of course, this Loki that we are joining throughout the course of the show is still very much a villain. Yeah,
2012 Loki. Yeah.
exactly. He has not been redeemed yet. And yeah, I just think it's a brilliant setup for a show. And so let's talk about it as you were leading us to episode 1, Glorious Purpose. Um, so we open up, and please feel free to jump in to fill in any gaps I might have,
Hmm.
um, with an almost perfect recreation of the scene that we saw in Avengers Endgame from a couple years ago. And I say almost because I've seen some breakdowns and reviews of the show where they actually point out the differences between the opening scene of
Yeah.
Loki versus the actual scene we saw in Avengers Endgame, and the differences are very subtle, but they're actually quite intelligent, like most
It's
everything
like
else in the show.
yeah, they took the skyline shot from I don't even think it was Endgame. I think it was the original Avengers. But they've removed like the Chitauri portal and all
Right.
the things lying around and instead had like pillars of smoke. So it was like after the war had been finished. And like subtle things like that, which is,
Yeah.
great attention to detail on
And
Marvel's part.
and also Loki's his
Oh yeah, they used an alternate
mocking.
take.
Yeah, his
Yeah, that
mocking of
was
Captain
fun.
America to make he did it in a way that was kind of less soldiery and more robotic.
Yeah.
And I thought that was brilliant.
But isn't
Um,
this a separate timeline altogether?
well, we'll talk
Well,
about that.
yeah,
You
we'll
know,
get it.
there's a lot of avenues that Loki is going to open, an almost incredible amount. I don't know why I said almost an incredible amount of new avenues, and so the scene plays out pretty much as we saw it in Avengers Endgame. Loki steals the Tesseract, uses the Space Stone to teleport himself. I guess just anywhere else than where he was. Understandably, I imagine any place would be a little bit more comfortable than where he was in that moment.
Yeah,
And
getting
he
tossed
pops
ready to
up
be sent to Asgard prison.
exactly, and he pops up in well, he pops up. He falls into a Mongolian desert, the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, where he is apprehended by um, uh, the Time Variance Authority.
The
Um,
TVA.
exactly, and he's brought to the TVA. He is essentially well, first the Tesseract is confiscated, and then he is essentially, he's stripped of all of his clothes. He has to sign that to confirm that this is everything he's ever said. He has to confirm he's not a robot by walking through a metal detector, which will obliterate him if he is a robot. Um, and then
I
he
like how in that scene he like criticizes people who don't know if they're a robot or not, and then he himself like
it
becomes
can't be sure.
unsure.
And yes, he's essentially guided to the TVA up to a point where he can stand trial for his crimes because Loki is a time deviant and his stealing of the Tesseract has created a serious branch to form off the sacred timeline. And therefore, the TVA either has to find a way to rewind what he's done or destroy him. And so he's taken to stand trial in front of Judge, I believe her name is Ravenna Renslayer, I believe her name was.
I think so,
Um,
yeah.
yes. And yes, while this is happening, we meet Agent Mobius for the first time. Mobius M. Mobius. A
Owen
hilarious
Wilson.
name. Owen Wilson, incredible. Who was in the south of France in the 16th century. And he's trying to get some answers because there is some shadowy figure out there in the timeline who is killing TVA agents. And no one is quite sure how this is happening or how this is possible. He asks some questions of a French peasant boy, and he notices that he doesn't really get anything useful out of him, but he does notice that his teeth are blue because he's been given some bubble gum that changes the color of your teeth, obviously from the future.
Yep.
And so naturally, it confirms the suspicion that this must be, a time traveling, very powerful murderer, essentially, who's terrorizing the timeline. He returns to the TVA because he learns that Loki's been apprehended, because he wants to convince the judge that instead of just destroying Loki, he can be useful to the TVA. And he wants to essentially get him to a place where he can talk so that he can deconstruct Loki and also hopefully get him to help the TVA solve these murders. Um, and so he gets his opportunity to sit down with Loki. He takes him to essentially this time theater where he can show him essentially his entire life, any moment from his timeline from its beginning to its ending. And this is, throughout pretty much the second act of the episode, it's very much like what Wanda Maximoff went through in episode 8 of WandaVision. It's
Yeah.
essentially a tour through Loki's life.
Yeah.
And it's all because Mobius wants to get Loki to realize that, Loki insists that he justifies everything he's done, all the people he's killed, all the people he's hurt, everything he's done is in the furtherance of him gaining power. He wants to rule over Midgard, he wants to rule over Earth, um, because that is his glorious purpose, as per the title. But what Mobius wants to get Loki to realize is that he doesn't just do it because he wants to rule over people. He does it because deep down he enjoys it. He's not bothered by hurting people, by killing people. In fact, the reason it's an inevitable consequence that follows him everywhere he goes is because he likes it. It's in his nature. Um, Loki obviously does not agree with this assessment at first. And eventually he's able to pickpocket Mobius because he is wearing a particular collar that essentially causes him to be caught in a time loop and revert back to an original position, almost like a save file in a video game.
Yeah.
Whenever he gets out of line. He goes up to some of the one of the TVA analysts' office, where he finds, this. First of all, he finds a drawer full of Infinity Stones because these Infinity Stones have been caught up and involved in so many time anomalies that they're just completely mundane items in the TVA. They have no power.
Yeah.
Outside of time, of course. So, but there's just they're just littered all over the place, and eventually he is caught up with by the main time agent, who I believe is I believe her designation is B-117 or something like that. The agent played by Wunmi Masaku, and eventually he's able to outsmart her, gets the collar on her, resets her continually, and finally Mobius catches up with Loki, um, and Loki finally relents and realizes, after watching how the rest of his timeline was supposed to play out, including his death at the hands of Thanos, that he does need to make amends. He does need to repent, and so he agrees to help Mobius. And the show ends on a very tantalizing stinger, where we cut to Oklahoma in the 1850s, where another group of TVA agents is investigating a seemingly unrelated anomaly. Apparently, someone from a millennium in the future went back to the 1850s to Oklahoma because they knew that there was, it was an oil patch, but it's the 1850s and no one knows what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
And I guess this person from, from 1,000 years in the future just really wanted to be rich by 19th century standards. I'm not entirely sure why, but it happened. But ultimately, we learned it was a ruse. The shadowy figure, the time murderer, is back, and burns all the TVA agents in the oil patch. And we don't see the identity of this person, but Mobius confirms that the person who is killing all of these time agents is in fact Loki, another version of Loki. Um, and that's where
How?
the episode
How?
ends.
What?
And so, yeah, fantastic. So, yeah, I know we both have a lot to say about it. Is there anything that you want to touch on right off the bat?
Oh, I mean the most interesting thing I think, um, they have these like timeline reset devices.
Yeah.
They're like these charges, so you can go into a branch that's not supposed to be there, like plant and activate this charge, and then it'll just like retcon the. Actually, in the comics, they had these weapons called retroactive cannons, where they
I've
literally like retcon
I have heard of that.
stuff in the comics. So I don't know if the batons or the charges are supposed to be that, but
Mm,
um the I guess who we assume is evil Loki, time hopping Loki, hooded figure,
mhm.
um, is murdering TV agents, but then stealing these timeline reset devices.
Yes.
So we don't know what that's for. If I had to guess, maybe gathering enough to destroy the sacred timeline,
Yeah, so yeah.
send us back into this multiverse of timelines.
Yeah, and so I think it's been pretty widely speculated that the hooded figure, the alternate Loki who is, killing all these TVA agents, is probably going to be Sophia DiMartino, and she's going to be playing Lady Loki. That's the
Yeah,
Loki who is killing all the TVA agents. Now, to what end, we're not exactly sure, but we know that we are going to be meeting a number of alternate Lokis over the course of this series. Well, obviously, we have our main Loki, the deviant Loki. We're gonna see President Loki at a later point.
that would be a fun one.
Yeah, we're gonna see alternate King of Asgard Loki, as well as probably Lady Loki. Not confirmed yet, but that's the wide speculation. Um, and also Richard E. Grant, very big name, very talented actor, is a cast member on this show, and yet at this point we have no idea who he might be playing. But obviously that's, a really big name person. That's not just going to be some bit part. So
Yeah,
could Richard E. Grant also be another version of Loki or a different villain entirely? We'll have to see.
or one of the timekeepers even,
Oh yeah, or
or um, it's not. I don't think it's Kang the Conqueror. I think it might be Kang the Conqueror. But in the comics, the woman who was the judge that oversaw Loki's trial,
yeah,
I don't remember her name, but in the
Renslayer
comics, she was the lover of.
of Kang.
I believe it's Kang the Conqueror. It might be just like a
Yeah,
different Celestial, but they're like
no,
trying
no,
to take over
you're
Earth. So
yeah, you're
again,
correct.
like other villain
And
that could be Grant.
yeah, and we know who's going to be playing Kang. They a few months ago they casted Jonathan Majors,
Oh yeah, yeah,
who
yeah,
was
yeah.
just in Lovecraft Country, to play Kang. He's going to show up in Ant-Man 3. So I think that there's a very likely crossover opportunity there. Do I think we'll see Jonathan Majors as Kang in Loki?
Probably not.
Maybe. I would doubt it. But I would not be surprised that if Richard E. Grant was maybe one of the timekeepers, acting as like maybe as like a Wizard of Oz figure, the man behind the curtain pulling the strings,
Yeah.
perhaps not nearly as grandiose as they're made out to be. Um, but yes, I think that's the best guess for who the hooded figure is. Would probably be Sophia DiMartino as Lady Loki. Um, which, I mean, catching a time murderer, is I mean, again, I mean, there's just so much to look forward to with this show. Um, one of the first things I wanted to talk about, and I had so much to say after coming out of watching this episode. I took some notes, so
You
please
like
bear with
wrote,
me.
wrote a full essay, yeah.
Because I had a lot of thoughts I had to get down on paper. So the very first thing I wanted to talk about was exposition. We have talked in the past about how good of a job Marvel does when it comes to bringing everybody along with the story. After over 10 years, almost 15 years at this point, of Marvel storytelling, the plot lines have gotten so interconnected and so dense in many respects, it would be so easy to lose casual fans along the way. I mean, it would be really easy. You're talking about Infinity Stones and time travel and Thanos, who's this villain
The
who was set
multiverse
up,
now,
yeah, and the
we're
multiverse
branching
of
into that.
all of this stuff. And yet, when you watch movies like Infinity War and Endgame, after all the storytelling that came before it, it it lays it out and it sets it up in a way where even the most casual fan can come in and understand everything they need to enjoy the story as much as someone who has seen every single movie, follows the plot closely, is a super fan like us.
Yeah.
And so I took some notes because I think Loki episode 1 was a masterclass in this. So if you were just a casual fan, right? If maybe you've seen some of the Marvel movies, but you're not that into it, you're generally familiar with them, or even just have a minimal knowledge of the MCU. Here are some questions that you might have. Let's say you saw Endgame 2 years ago, but you really haven't thought much about it since.
Yeah, you kind
So
of have to have like right out the gate, you kind of have to have seen Endgame
Right. Yeah.
to
Endgame is kind of
start the series, but
yeah. Yeah.
given that
Endgame
like
is
it became the number one grossing movie of all time for a short period.
yeah. Until Avatar cheated by coming back into theaters. I
Yeah.
don't know who was going back to watch Avatar 10 years later, but apparently somebody was. So yeah, so Endgame is kind of required reading, but assuming that you saw that, or maybe even if you didn't see that, but you just have a basic general knowledge, here are some questions you might have. Isn't Loki dead? Didn't he die in Infinity War? I thought Loki was good now. Didn't he have a heroic turn after the Avengers? How does time travel work in the MCU? Also, how did Loki escape in an Endgame? These are just some questions that you might have if you were a basic level watcher of of Loki, basic level knowledge of the MCU. Now let's take it a step further. Let's say you have moderate knowledge of the MCU. You like the movies, you've seen a bunch of them. Maybe you don't remember every detail, but you remember the important stuff.
Mhm.
Here are some questions that person might have. So, what is the TVA, Time Variance Authority? How does it work? How did Loki break the timeline? Didn't Cap put all the stones back? Captain America. He had the Space Stone, not the Time Stone. So how did he break the timeline if he only traveled through space? Aren't the Avengers as big of time villains as Loki is? Um, Wait. Also, who are the timekeepers? And also, there was a time war in the past. We've never heard about this before. Oh yeah, and also the biggest one of all. There's a multiverse now, like an actual one, not like a fake out multiverse from Far From Home. A real multiverse. These are all questions that you might have if you are a moderate to advanced, shall I say, MCU fan. And every single one of these questions is answered by the end of the episode, and the majority of them are answered. And I went back
In the
to check
beginning,
this
yeah.
within the first 15 minutes of the episode. I would say about of these questions, how many do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I would say about 10 of them are answered within the first 15 minutes of the show.
I mean, a ton of them are answered within like the span of maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah,
It's just from that like animated presentation by Miss Minutes.
exactly.
And like it has it's interesting because it's a perfect blend between show don't tell, but also tell so they get it. Um,
Exactly.
where you
Exactly.
can see exactly what they're talking about, but it's implied to be about Loki, and you're right. It's it's well done. I have
It's
to say.
incredible, and I'm glad you brought up Miss Minutes. I skipped over that in the synopsis because I wanted to get into that in greater detail now. But before I do, I wanted to ask you, as someone who is, definitely, a big Marvel fan like myself, did you ever feel like you were, because this speaks to how good the exposition is done, did you ever feel like
So
you were being spoon-fed
let
information?
me um let me start out by saying, like many people, I have two parents.
Mhm,
They both are fall into that casual fan of
mhm,
the MCU. They saw Endgame, like you said, it was 2 years ago, so they didn't really remember any of the details. Um, and my brother and I, we had to answer a few questions within like the first 30 seconds or minute of the show, just to get them up to speed. But then after that, no questions. So it's like parent approved.
Absolutely.
Which is, I mean, that's probably like the greatest test at all. Is that like, if your mom and dad get it, then
No, totally. I
it
mean, if
makes
they can
sense.
follow along, especially with all of this stuff, all of this new information on top of
Yeah,
remembering the old information, I
but
mean,
here's,
yeah,
but here's the thing too. Is like, for me, I understand what happened to Loki. I kind of understand all the nuances of why he is a variant and not the Avengers and blah blah blah. But the interesting thing is that they are providing a lot of new information, but they're also not giving a lot of information.
mm,
They say the timekeepers created this, sacred timeline. We don't know who the timekeepers are, but, you know, we don't really need to know for the context of Loki's journey through the TVA.
Hmm.
So that's like a point where it's okay not to have that exposition. Because if you like took time to explain the timekeepers are three beings created at the beginning of the like no one cares. So stuff like that, stuff like, why does the TVA look the way it does with these like, you know, orange color palettes straight out of the 50s? And this whole like, you know, bureaucratic aesthetic, which is really cool, by the way. I
Yeah, we're gonna
love
talk
that.
about that too.
They have like this whole city and all these departments, and it's like, they don't explain that, but because it's not directly relevant to, the context of the episode, it doesn't matter, and it leaves, I wouldn't say plot threads because there isn't much plot, but like, it's something that could be explained at a later date, but doesn't need to be. And I
Right.
think that's kind of the most interesting thing that this show does.
Absolutely.
A very
Absolutely.
fine line, and they straddle it really well.
Absolutely. You know, as I said, I think it was really a masterclass in bringing everybody along, imparting a ton of new information, and also rehashing just enough of the old information to make sure that everybody is caught up, no matter what your level of knowledge is. People like you and me, I mean, we don't need a refresher because we watch all the theory videos and all the breakdowns and all that stuff. So we're
Yep.
with it. But of course, we're like in the top 10 percentile of people who are watching these Marvel shows. So
For those of you who are curious as to what the top 1% is, I think it's the people who make the videos that we
exactly,
watch.
yeah, exactly. Like even we know our limits. We don't
Yeah.
claim to be we don't claim to be that yet. We'll see. It's maybe down the road.
Time will
uh
tell.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, it's I was really blown away by that. I thought it was a master class in bringing in a ton of new information and old information, but it never feels forced. It feels completely natural to the story. It's introduced in interesting ways. You're engaged the whole time. At no point do you feel like the whole story stops so that you can get a quick MCU history lesson. Like it's move everything moves, everything is snappy, and everything works. So that was the first thing I wanted to say because I was really taken aback by that. Within the first 15 minutes, the vast majority of these questions are answered, and by the end of the episode, all of them are. So, outstanding. And so, I want to talk about what you just brought up, which was Miss Minutes.
Hmm.
Speaking of exposition, because this was definitely the most exposition heavy, spot in the episode, but it was brilliant. You have this. I I love I think Miss Minutes is such a brilliant plot device, because she's this little animated clock that who is so folksy and yet just so menacing. And it's I think Miss Minutes is brilliant. Um
I think Miss Minutes is the cloaked figure, honestly.
I mean, honestly, I wouldn't put anything past Loki. I really wouldn't. But yeah, I think that's a great character. You see Miss Minutes posters all over the TVA.
The propaganda that they have in the backgrounds.
Yeah,
That's like you only see on a second or third watch.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I forget what the exact line was, but it's something like, "Don't get out of line or you'll get your clock cleaned." And it's like an image
Yeah.
of Miss Minutes curb stomping another clock. It's like a very it's a very cute like police state figure. And I just think that's great. And
A
there's
tidy
like
desk is a tidy timeline.
Exactly, exactly. And there's a sequence before Loki goes on trial where it's like a very much, almost reminiscent of like WandaVision almost set us up for this. It was a very 60s Jetsons-esque animated sequence explaining the timekeepers and the sacred timeline and the significance of the time variance authority and what makes a person a deviant. And again, I mean, it was just a brilliant way to impart a lot of new information, a lot of exposition. The best exposition is the kind of exposition where you don't realize that you're being given a ton of exposition. You're along for the ride and it feels natural to the story.
Yeah.
And I thought that sequence was a great way to impart a ton of new information once again with the term nexus, multiverse, sacred timeline, timekeepers, time war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I thought that was an absolutely great sequence. Um, Yeah, honestly, I say bring on more Jetsons, Jetson style expository sequences just across the board. We could use more of them in film and in TV. Instead of just having some character laboriously explain, well, I'm this person and you're that person. We have to go to X to do Y.
I
You
think
know,
I think the market that needs that type of videos most are like workplace safety videos.
agreed. Yeah,
Where instead of like terrible acting from these guys who pretend to get like just have Miss Minutes like
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
be like
Call up
follow the
Disney.
rules or you'll
You
get
know,
hurt. Fuck.
exactly. Yeah, I am with you 100% on that. Yeah,
Don't forget to
absolutely.
clock in or get clocked out.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I thought that whole sequence was just brilliant. Very, very reminiscent of, when you remember in Jurassic Park how you have Mr. DNA. When they're going into the park, they watch that
Yeah.
little movie,
Yeah.
explaining how they were able to bring dinosaurs back. It felt a lot like that.
But
Um,
Mr. DNA was more of like a Clippy situation, I feel.
Yeah, yeah, but he also kind of had like the southern thing going on.
Yeah.
It was kind of folksy. It kind of reminds me of that a little bit.
It's that Southern hospitality.
Yeah, yeah, like I said, folksy yet menacing. Um, and so yes, I'm very glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk about Miss Minute segment in more detail, and I hope that there are many more Miss Minute segments throughout the show, because I think Miss Minutes, as you said, I think she is the friendly face of a very dark force. Some. Well, we'll get into theories, but I think it's safe to say I think we're thinking the same thing. The timekeepers are not who they say they are. If they do even exist. There's something fishy about how neatly this story comes together of how the TVA came to be. Um, there's something going on with the timekeepers, and we know something going on with the timekeepers because we know one of them goes on to become Kang the Conqueror, who is definitely not a nice guy. So yeah, that was a great, great sequence. So I wanted to talk about some of the influences that I thought Loki drew from really well.
Hmm.
Um, you know, the first one I think is pretty obvious. You have the Men in Black influence. The Time Variance Authority and how Loki gets brought into the Time Variance Authority is very similar to Men in Black.
Well,
Uh,
I'm gonna cut you off there actually.
mm,
The first like reference and homage they do is Loki landing in the sand, like
mm,
Tony Stark did in the very first movie.
right? Yeah,
Like
it's,
a
it's, it's true.
callback way to the first Iron Man.
Yeah, yeah, it's,
But
it's it's very circular.
yeah, but Men in Black continue.
So in both cases you have and they're both action comedies, and the setup is almost shockingly similar. So in Men in Black, as in Loki, you have an unwitting outsider who is brought into an extremely advanced peacekeeping agency with a retro aesthetic. Who oversee everything in secret and have a signature device which erases any memory of their presence. So right off the bat, I mean, there's a lot of parallels there. The
And
two have essentially the same premise.
I feel like there's a bigger distinction between a device that erases your memory and a device that erases your existence,
Right.
personally.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying I'm
But
not. It's not the same device as the device that cleans your clock and rewinds you out of existence. I mean the device, the one that they leave behind, like for the Mongolians when they're resetting the timeline.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
no,
It's
that
it's.
just erases the timeline. Those Mongolians get erased from existence.
You think so? I thought it
Yeah,
just like
yeah, no,
reset
it's
it back to
brutal.
the moment
Everyone in that
before.
timeline just gets vaporized.
Oh, I see. And I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, they
Okay,
clip
so
the branch. At least
yeah,
that's what I think.
yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm assuming. Because
I guess I guess they'll have to explain that further because we pointedly never actually see one in use. We always
yeah,
cut away before it finishes its process. But we know that the hooded figure wants them, so they must be quite powerful. But either way, they both have a signature device that, one way or another, erases any memory of their being there. Even if the timekeepers are perhaps a little bit more, or the TVA, I should say, a little bit more severe potentially.
yeah.
Um, And another influence that I really picked up on was you have a big Doctor Who, I think, influence as well. Because with Doctor Who, you have a roguish alien time traveler who ventures across space and time, solving mysteries, and gets embroiled in larger conflicts. Also very similar to Loki, who
And
is
she's British.
yes, and who also British as well, notably. Um,
That is a good pull. That is a Yeah, I think it's a little hard to draw that conclusion just from the first episode, but I think looking at the series as a whole, it is
yeah,
going to be majorly Doctor Who.
yeah,
That is a very good call.
and do you know how I can say that confidently after only just this episode? Because the writers themselves are making that connection. Because
Mm,
the time analyst that Loki runs into in the office, the one who has like a dozen Infinity Stones
yep.
in his drawer, which I have to say I found that to be hilarious. That is Marvel could not be more clear in communicating that we are finished with Infinity Stones by literally showing a dozen of them in a desk drawer, and they're so mundane they're being used as paperweights. You know,
That and showing how powerful the TVA is.
exactly. It was just I thought that was hilarious and brilliant. It was both just a really funny gag because we spent 10 years so invested in these stones just to see them used as paperweights. But also, it was Marvel telling us that, hey, Infinity Saga's over. The stones don't mean anything anymore. We're moving on to the multiverse. But that same analyst refers to Loki as the criminal with the blue box, just like Doctor Who.
Mm,
So,
mm.
so, so that's what really
But
ticked
he
me
also
off. Too.
calls the blue box dumb.
Yeah, well,
It's the Tesseract. That sounds dumb.
yeah, well, still, I'll take what I can get.
No, that's
Um,
wow.
so
I didn't even catch that.
yeah, that's what ticked me off to the Doctor Who thing. And also just the general aesthetic of the TVA. And maybe this one's more of a stretch. Let me know what you think about this. But I was getting very major like Fallout vibes too. Like it felt very similar. The way the TVA looks, the Miss Minute segment, it all feels a little Fallout, doesn't it?
I It's very close. It's very similar. I think Fallout was like late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah, and this is
And I
more
think
late
this is
60s, early
like,
70s.
yeah, late or even late 50s, early 60s. Maybe it's 67. I can't remember, but
Yeah, it's around
you're right
60.
though. It does kind of have some of that vibe where it's like I don't want to say Americana, but it's like
It's
pulling
very
from
mid-century.
very American style of a time period.
Yeah. It's very mid-century, and not just the design of the place as well, but also the technology that they use. When when like when we go to a segment that's not set in the TVA, when we're actually at a specific place and time, you notice how the dates like flip down, like like
Yeah.
an old signboard, like at a train station. They use typewriters and dot jet printers and all of this stuff that you would see like 70s era technology,
Yeah.
and a very 60s kind of visual aesthetic, kind of like Mad Men as well. In that it's a 60s office setting.
Did you ever see The Umbrella Academy?
I have watched that, yeah. The
It's
second season.
it's
I haven't seen the first.
oh, in the second season, do they also have the time offices?
Yeah,
I believe that yeah, it's like that. It's the
it's
same kind of
very similar to
aesthetic,
that. Yeah,
which
totally. Yeah.
I feel like there's enough of that in pop culture that that should be its own genre of like the 70s corporate America, but for a time travel agency.
Yeah. It actually is
It's a little
more
strange.
common. Yeah. And now that I think about it, yeah, that actually is pretty common. And that's actually a good segue into the next thing I wanted to talk about. And I think this is a big part of the reason why you see it popping up in a few shows, is the set design just overall was incredible throughout this
Yeah.
episode, and I'm sure it's going to be continue to be so throughout the series. But also, the set design is brilliant because of how it relates to the themes of the TVA and the themes of the show overall. You know, like oftentimes, like you have great sets, and you can say, well, those were brilliantly put together sets that really did a credit to the movie, the show, whatever it is. But rarely can you say that not only did it do credit to the show, but it also added to the message of what the show is trying to communicate.
Yeah.
But that's what they were able to do here, because think about the TVA. I mean, this is a literal omnipotent agency. They exist outside of time. They could have the most advanced futuristic technology possible in existence. There is no reason that there it seems that their technological capacity has not moved beyond 1972, despite the fact that they can literally take technology and advancement from anywhere.
Yeah.
But what's brilliant about why that is because the TVA is this massive, lumbering, hulking bureaucracy. And what do massive, lumbering bureaucracies do? They spend so much time and energy sustaining themselves that they never have time to step back and update stuff like the wallpaper. And that's what makes it so brilliant because, by having all this stuff, like typewriters from the 60s and 70s, it conveys the feeling that despite the fact that they could be so advanced, they just reached a certain point and just kind of said, this is all right. And they just continued on a flat line from that point forward. Because that's what the TVA is. Despite how advanced they are, ultimately they just maintain. They don't really, they make, it's not their job to alter things. It's just their job to keep the sacred flow of time moving in the direction it's supposed to go in. And you really get that message conveyed not just through what you're getting through dialogue, but also through the set design itself. By making everything so retro, at least, by our standards in 2021, it conveys the feeling that the TVA is all powerful but stagnant, which is kind of what it is. It's supposed to be bureaucratic and boring and, almost unfathomably huge. And naturally, an unfathomably huge organization or corporation, they wouldn't care about such mundane stuff as the wallpaper,
Yeah.
or the tiling, or stuff like that. So,
And I think it even goes beyond that. There's because one of the themes of the show, or at least that we can see so far, is this idea of being like both stuck in place or like stuck in a loop in Loki's case where he's kind of emotionally feels trapped in this persona that he's created, but also feeling like kind of removed from time,
exactly,
with
yeah.
is a very literal thing, but also just not feeling like you're in the right place, fitting in, which I think will become more apparent as Loki sees other versions of himself, and he also saw the timeline he was supposed to go on, and he's like, I mean, that was my glorious purpose, and I'm not fulfilling it. I
Exactly.
feel left out of time, and that 70s thing is like they're out of time, they're out of the era they should be in. Um, yeah, but you're absolutely right. The set design just enhances as it should. And the other thing I appreciate about it is that you know I mean a lot of movies and TV shows are able to do this, but I don't think many do it better than Marvel, where they give you stuff to find on your second, third, fourth rewatch
Hmm.
of whatever it is you're watching. Um, and I think that's great. That
Oh,
they
totally.
have all these propaganda posters, all these details. There's a ton of details in the credits. Um, they don't have to do those things. They didn't have to design literal posters, print them out, and then paste them on the wall of the set. But
Hmm.
they did,
Yeah.
and I like that.
Yeah, totally,
I think
totally.
that's pretty nice.
No, absolutely, and also just to kind of expand on what you just said about being able to find things on second viewings and third viewings, you know, that's a big part of why I was gonna say, this is, I think, pretty easily the best intro episode, a best premiere episode that we've gotten yet for MCU Disney Plus show. You know, I look back on WandaVision, and you and I both loved WandaVision. And WandaVision episode 1 was really good. Like it was really good, but WandaVision episodes in general were just so short. They were all around half an hour, and 7 minutes of that is credits. And so you had this 23-minute episode, which didn't even really stand on its own, because if you remember, WandaVision came out with episodes 1 and 2 first. And so we
Mm.
never really had to sit with episode 1 before we could just go on to episode 2. And I think that of the two, for me at least, episode 2 was a little more memorable than episode 1 was. I like episode 1 was great. It was fun with like the dinner with the hearts, and Wanda's trying to conceal her powers, and you have the great practical wire effects with the food floating around, and
Yeah.
all that stuff is great. But yeah, I mean, it kind of got buried, number one because it was so short, and number two because it released alongside episode 2, which was just as strong, if not stronger. um, and then you have Falcon and Winter Soldier, which, I'll be honest with you, beyond the like very beginning of episode 1 of Falcon and Winter Soldier, I couldn't really tell you what happened in episode 1 of that show. I honestly, I don't remember. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
think he applies for a bank loan in that one, or maybe that was episode
yeah,
2.
so in that episode, we see Sam Wilson give up the shield, and then he's talking to Rhodey for a little bit, and then
Right,
yeah, he's I think doing we see him do that government military job where he rescues hostages
right.
from that whole helicopter chase, and then
Yeah, that was at the
down in
very end.
the
I remember that.
down trying to repair the boat, get a bank loan. But like that whole first episode, we don't see Bucky. He's not in the first episode, and he's literally the second character in the title of that show.
Yeah,
I will
yeah,
give WandaVision some credit because although the episodes were short, that was very intentional because that is like, the same length that sitcoms used to be in the day, where each of
yeah,
the
yeah.
episodes mimic that. Um, and yeah, one, having the first and second episode together, they kind of blend together. But honestly, I think the bigger issue was that you had to sit with the first three episodes and have no idea what was going on
Mm,
before you get the explanation from the fourth episode.
right.
Whereas Loki, it's asking all these questions, but then answering them
Mm,
immediately, and it's just jumping right into the action. And I really appreciate that. And a lot has happened, even though not much has really happened. Like he got captured by the TVA, and by the end of the episode, he's still in the TVA. He didn't go anywhere. He didn't
right.
really do anything, but he had this emotional journey, and we're ready to start the series, but it doesn't feel boring or confusing. We are not lost.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so yeah, I mean, for me, this was the strongest intro we've had yet for a Disney Plus show. I love the length. I mean, it's I believe 52 minutes with credits,
Yep.
so about
No
45
doubt.
minutes of show, which is great. More of that, please. I mean, even if it does, because I get it, it's a trade-off because then you have fewer episodes. But I do like having the longer episodes as compared to the WandaVision model. Although I do understand that the WandaVision model did serve a purpose because it, was one more way it was mimicking sitcoms, as you said. Um, but yeah, loved the length of it, and also to what you just said. I mean, this was an expository episode essentially. Like Loki ends the episode in terms of physical location virtually where he began it, but he goes on a very important emotional journey which will make the entire rest of the series possible.
Yeah.
And I think that, and again, I mean, as far as exposition goes, it's done so brilliantly because you don't notice or mind that you're essentially everything is just explained to you. Explained to you, and also explained to Loki because he needs to be caught up as well about what's been going on with Loki. um and you never mind it. It never feels like the story never drags. You never feel bored. It keeps moving. It keeps moving. Despite being an exposition episode, there's not a dull moment. And I think
Yeah.
that's another reason why I think this was definitely the strongest Disney Plus intro. It'll be hard to beat. It really will be.
Yeah. We have this, there's this saying that you hear everywhere in writing and in filmmaking, and it's always show don't tell, show don't tell, show don't tell. And the general consensus is that exposition is lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree. I think there are lazy ways to do exposition and there are smart ways to do exposition, and Loki was very smart about it. It's
Definitely.
incorporating show don't tell, but it's still telling, but it's not like, you don't have that boring conversation where it's like, oh, hey man, it's good to see you. You're, my favorite brother ever, and we've been hanging out for 4 years in this apartment. Have you found a job yet? Like, it's not like that. Um, it's Loki being really confused in this new place. We see hints of what's going on through these poster and Miss Minutes and Morbius is explaining some stuff, but he's being vague, and we're getting Loki's reaction, how he feels about it. It's bringing him on an emotional journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you're familiar, are you familiar with the Joseph Campbell's story circle? The
Yes, yeah, I'm vaguely familiar.
Yeah, so it's like you have the status quo, and then you go into the world of the unknown, and then you come out with having like gone through some trial and received this award.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it does that. Loki does that, uh, even though some of those steps, their catalyst is just exposition, and that's why exposition isn't necessarily lazy. It's lazy writers overuse exposition. There is a
Definitely.
smart way to do it. Loki did that.
Definitely. I I don't know why this is the example that comes to mind first, but for some reason this one really sticks out to me for like a good example of in a prominent project that I think did exposition really poorly was the both Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and even more so the sequel, The Crimes of Grindelwald. I remember there being like the first Fantastic Beasts film was pretty good.
Eh.
Okay, yeah, I'm okay. I don't want to make it seem like it was,
It's an F from me.
yeah, I don't want to make it seem like it, holds a candle to the Harry Potter films. Like it was
Absolutely not.
okay. It was okay. I remember watching it in the theater and finding it to be basically entertaining. The sequel was a hot mess. The Crimes of Grindelwald was terrible.
Yeah, I didn't
And
I didn't even see that one. I was like,
yeah, I wouldn't
no,
recommend
thank
it.
you.
I wouldn't recommend it. It was bad. But in both of those movies, you had a lot of exposition, and particularly in Crimes of Grindelwald, I remember there being a lot of exposition delivered really poorly. But that is not an issue here. I mean, as you explained, I mean, the exposition is handled really well, and it's all shown, not it's not lectured to us.
It's both shown and told, but more importantly, the exposition serves a greater purpose more than just telling the audience.
Exactly. And so, yeah,
Also,
it's gonna be tough to beat.
this is a like going way back in our conversation, but we were talking about how, Loki is really good about just answering these different questions.
Hmm.
Um, for the casual fan who might not remember the entirety of Loki's journey, we literally see it when he's like watching the his time reel on the
Right.
time projector. Uh,
Right.
I feel like in the show we can just add time onto anything in the
Yeah,
TV
pretty
and it would
much.
be accurate.
And just
Um,
like in the Ant-Man films, everything is
yeah, it's
quantum. In
quantum.
Loki,
Yeah,
everything is
it's
time. Yeah.
time. Um, but like, if you had forgotten Loki's journey, it's spelled out for you there. You're all caught up by the end of the episode. So actually, even if you didn't see Endgame,
You have what
you
you need to
still
know.
by the end of the episode, you're, caught up for the rest of the series to play out.
Exactly.
That just came to me. We already covered that, but
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's just one more example, and I'm glad you brought it up because again, it's so important for because the MCU is massive and it's only getting bigger.
so big.
Now we're getting 4 movies a year. We're gonna get like 7 Disney Plus shows a year. Everything is so interconnected. You have to find ways like that again to bring along everybody from the most passionate hardcore fans to the most casual, just want to watch something on Disney Plus fans. And again, I mean, Loki has so much to explain in such a short amount of time, but it does it masterfully. As you said, they find little ways from Miss Minutes segment to the Time Theater, to just all throughout. I mean, if you went in with a minimal amount of MCU information, like you knew the bare minimum, but that was it, you are equipped with everything you need to know about Loki by the end of the episode. You don't even have to have seen Endgame because they give you the Endgame scene right up front. Like everything that's critical to know about Loki and the TVA and the timeline and the timekeepers and everything else you are equipped with by the end of this episode, and by episode 2 we're off to the races. So it's absolutely brilliant how they do it. And I mean, it is so important because, at the end of the day, I mean, they already have people like us. We'll show up to watch Tony Stark eat a ham sandwich. That's they don't have to worry about us. But it's for the casual people. If they get lost, then that's a big chunk of your audience. So you have to find a way to bring everybody along. Just like the parent example. I've done the same thing for my parents. They remember vague plot points, but I have to kind of string it together for them at the beginning of every new movie. And the less I have to do of that is the
Yeah.
better job that whatever it is done in making sure that everything is accessible. So I thought that
It's
was
what I
great.
said. It passes the parent tests. And
Yeah, and,
that's
and
that's hard to do, but it did it.
exactly, yeah, and if you can do that, I think that's a victory. So yes. Um, so just a few miscellaneous things. First of all, needless to say, it was very funny. There were some great comedic moments and jokes in episode 1. I
What's a
loved
fish?
yeah, I loved how Loki is DB Cooper
Oh
in
yeah,
the
that was
Prime
that was
Marvel
so good.
timeline. That was just fantastic. And and not even for any particular reason. He just did it because
On a bet, yeah.
he was dared to. That's fantastic. I'm looking forward to Loki being at the center of more unsolved mysteries. We know he's going to be in Pompeii at a later episode. Um, and yeah, I thought that was tremendous. And I'm not at all surprised because, of course, the head writer and showrunner of this show is Michael Waldron, who is an alumni of the Rick and Morty writers' room. So,
Mm,
it goes a long way to explain why, all the dialogue is very witty, it's very sharp, it's very fast. Again, the pace keeps up. It's very, it has a lot of that shared DNA with Rick and Morty, and you could tell just in this episode 1. I think we're going to get a lot more of that as well as we get deeper into the TVA and deeper into alternate Lokis, and Lady Loki and Richard E. Grant's character and all those other people. I think we're
yeah.
going to see a lot of those Rick and Morty parallels. Um, Even the TVA itself, you could see as a kind of version of like the Citadel of Ricks, if you remember that plot line, which means that there is an evil Morty at the center of it all, perhaps, which I think is very possible. I think Richard E. Grant might be our evil Morty of Loki. So we'll see, we'll see. This is where we're just throwing out theories here, but
I'm telling you, I'm not putting that in the thumbnail. You can't make me.
no, that's all right. I'll concede that one. Um, But yeah,
Oh
great,
goodness.
great comedy. I'm really excited for just to see more of Tom Hiddleston really be able to flex his comedic chops, because Loki has had some great funny moments throughout the movies, particularly like he was like the best part of Thor: The Dark World, or
Yeah.
certainly one of the best parts.
The only
Um,
good part is how I would phrase it, but
yeah, yeah, definitely one of the few shining stars of that film.
he was great in
Uh,
Ragnarok.
yeah, fantastic in Ragnarok, and I mean he has great timing, and he can do comedy really well. He can do physical comedy really well, and I'm just excited to see him do more of that throughout this series. And yeah, so here's another thing I wanted to mention. A lot of these series, these Disney Plus series, are being marketed as event series. They're not really intended to go beyond their one season. They're functionally just mini series. They're supposed to
Hmm.
tell a story in this corner of the MCU and set up
They're
those
like
characters for the next
extended
movie.
movies.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, and they're supposed to give characters that get crowded in team up films, more room to breathe, tell a unique story, and get them set up for the next movie. But Loki is the first show. WandaVision is strictly a miniseries. That's not coming back. They've already confirmed that.
Yeah.
Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it was discussed if they might do a season 2, but now it's if they're going to do a fourth Captain America movie now with Sam Wilson. Um,
Yeah, if anything, if they do a second season, it would be after.
yeah, yeah.
And
So
then it technically wouldn't even be the same series. It would now be Captain America and the Winter Soldier.
exactly, yeah. And so I think they're going to now, instead of doing a second season, they're just going to make a fourth Cap movie with
Yeah.
Sam. But Loki is confirmed to be getting a second season, so we know that this Loki variant will be. Well, I don't want to say we know. We don't know anything. Anything could happen between now and episode 6, but it seems likely that this will be an ongoing plot line with this Loki variant going around solving time mysteries and time crimes.
Wait,
I mean,
who confirmed that?
oh,
That
that's already been officially announced. Kevin Feige said they're coming back for a season 2.
interesting. So
Yes.
I oh that interesting. Interesting.
And I'm actually really, well, I don't want to say actually, I mean, I shouldn't be that surprising. I'm actually really excited about it because, you know, Loki is definitely a story. It looks like it's going to be a story that is going to be a lot easier to serialize than WandaVision or Falcon Winter Soldier, because it literally exists outside of the timeline. Like Loki could do anything, and it could be explained away as either it was reset or it was in a different timeline or a different universe even, and you could
Yeah, you can
you
have
could have
limitless one-off adventures.
exactly. I mean, there are infinite possibilities for just one episode per time mysteries and time crimes with Loki, and it's a lot easier to serialize than those other shows, which are very much strictly within the main MCU timeline. So I'm glad they're going to do more, regardless of what happens with the rest of this season. Because I mean, I think it's the one thing that they've announced that I think can really be extended over multiple seasons as compared to the other event series.
Yeah. Do you mind if I give my prediction, or do you have more you
Oh,
wanna?
I don't, well, no, I just one more thing on that
Because I
point
don't,
before you go ahead.
I know you have more notes, and I don't want to like completely derail the conversation, but
Oh no, yeah, actually my notes are finished. I was just gonna say, despite what I just said, Loki also I think is going to actually end up being more of an event series than any of the other event series we've gotten or will get. Not saying that those weren't events because they were, but this is really an event in the sense that this has a greater this takes a wider view of the MCU than anything we saw in WandaVision or Falcon Winter Soldier, or frankly we're likely to see in Miss Marvel or Hawkeye or any of the other next upcoming shows. I'll be honest with you, I'm Hawkeye was the one I was always nervous about. I don't know what they're gonna do with Hawkeye. I trust them, but that's gonna be tough.
they,
Um,
yeah, so far they've delivered on all of these shows,
yeah,
but also it's Hawkeye.
yeah, like I'm not worried. I'm just saying that I
It's the
always
one I'm
said
least interested in.
exactly, and that's the one I've always said that's going to be the biggest challenge. How are you going to what angle are you going to give Hawkeye? Because WandaVision had a very clear angle. Falcon and the Soldier was doing, buddy action thing. Loki is a very unique. I think Miss Marvel is going to be, also kind of it's going to have the more, teenage angle. It's going to be kind of like a, Peter Parker type thing, balancing high school and being a superhero. Hawkeye? Eh,
Yeah, I think the Hawkeye show is like him training his daughter to
yeah,
be the next Hawkeye.
the next Hawkeye, but
Like I don't know.
now,
I don't know if they get involved in Shield or Sword and play off of that, or if it's just I don't know if they like do something more similar to Invincible where they focus on like a teenager who's a superhero and, all the stuff that comes with that.
Yeah. But
But
then it's too similar to Miss Marvel. So what do you do?
ah, you don't do it because no one cares about Hawkeye.
Yeah, that's the thing is that
Like
yeah,
maybe
I'm
one episode.
right. Yeah, that's the thing is that I don't see the angle for it. And I know this is a total tangent, but yeah, I'm not worried. I've always wondered every other one of these shows has a very specific angle. I'm not sure what they're gonna do with Hawkeye. I get it's him training his daughter. Maybe Sharon Carter will pop back up. Maybe there'll be some power broker conflict. I don't know, but we'll see. But anyway, yes, see, I've lost my train of thought. I was just saying? What was I just saying? Um,
I
where
don't
did we
know.
leave
All I
off?
know is that I was trying to think of a way to incorporate shoot your shot or have Marvel shoot their shot, but I couldn't even do that naturally.
Oh boy, this is gonna eat me up. Where was I? Um, oh yes, it's more of an event series than any of the other event series because this is the widest view of the MCU we've seen taken yet from one of these shows. It's not just a corner or a pocket of the MCU. This has implications that affect everything.
Yeah.
And so, Loki, I think, could become like a required reading for the MCU, almost in the same way that Infinity War and Endgame is. Because I think you're going to see. I mean, Loki's talking about the multiverse and timelines, and this stuff is going to become very important. We know coming up with Spider-Man and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I mean, this is going to become, like bedrock stuff. So, you know,
I'm glad you brought up Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness
also
because I
written.
think I think the I don't know what you're thinking, but I believe that most people are expecting that the show is going to set up the multiverse
Mm,
for Doctor Strange,
yeah.
which means the timelines are going to messed up by the end of the show, presumably. It's going to branch off of the sacred timeline, and then we'll get into the multiverse. And then Doctor Strange will fix it, traverse it. I don't know. And then, the fact that they're doing a season 2 of Loki just complicates things even further because it's like, at that point, is it him and the TVA trying to like jump through these multiverses and repair them, destroy them, like clip the
Mhm.
branches? Like,
Yeah,
what do you think is gonna happen? Because I just
here's my guess. I think that right now in the MCU, at the beginning of Phase 4, we have two camps. We have on the one hand, you have shows that are very much more traditionalist MCU stuff, like the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like Black Widow, like what I think we're gonna see with Eternals and Miss Marvel and Hawkeye and shows like that, Secret Invasion. Those are all very much continuing in the vein of stuff that storylines that we've set up previously, like Scrolls and that kind of thing. Um, so that's one camp. In the other camp, you have what I don't have a good name for them, but what I'm calling kind of the stepping stones to, the road to Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness. We began it with WandaVision. WandaVision was all about this pocket reality. And by the end of it, you have Wanda Maximoff, officially the Scarlet Witch.
a
She's
Nexus being.
she's a Nexus being, and she is now obsessed with finding her kids. That's the stinger at the end of WandaVision pretty much sets up, she's got the Darkhold. She is going to flip through realities like television channels until she can find one where her kids are still alive. Moving on to Loki, where I think that by the end of Loki, it's not going to be a clean resolution. I think that something is going to happen. Either Sophia DiMartino's Lady Loki or Richard E. Grant. Somehow the timeline is going to be broken irrevocably, maybe because of a mission failure or maybe by design. Maybe the timekeepers are actually malevolent, but something is going to go wrong, and the TVA is going to be the TVA is going to have to is going to be unable to stop a permanent splintering of the timelines. That's Loki. Then we move forward. Eternals might inform this a little bit, but I think Eternals is going to be more
I think,
historical
yeah, I
than
think it's going to be completely
than
separate.
yeah. So I would say Eternals might have a little bit of a foot in both camps, but I think it's going to be much more historical than looking forward. So what comes next after that? I'm gonna say Spider-Man No Way Home. Again, we don't have anything official yet, but we know we're getting Doctor Octopus back from the Sam Raimi films. We know we're getting Electro back from the Amazing Spider-Man films. You know, I don't see, we're getting the multiverse introduced in Loki. We know that, in the sequence of things, Loki had to come out before a lot of these subsequent projects later in the year. Um, and so I don't see how you explain bringing those characters back without bringing in some kind of multiverse concept, especially if the rumors are true and we're going to get previous Spider-Men in from different universes as well. That's got to have multiverse implications.
Yeah.
And then we lead directly into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. All of these, each of those shows, WandaVision, Loki, Spider-Man 3, are laying the seeds, laying the groundwork for the ultimate crisis in Doctor Strange 2. The Scarlet Witch with her messing with reality to find her kids, Loki and the broken timelines, Spider-Verse, Doctor Strange 2. That's my theory.
Yeah. Well, then what about Loki season 2?
Well, I think that's well, and here's the connective tissue because as I said, Michael Waldron wrote Loki. He's the showrunner on this, and he also came in to do rewrites on Doctor Strange 2, and so he's intimately involved in both projects. So I think he probably he may be one of only a handful of people on Earth who knows where things go beyond Doctor Strange 2. But I think he has a plan for where Loki will be going, where he will be, and where he'll be going after that.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, it's safe to assume that Loki will still exist. This Loki deviant will still exist in some form after that event, if there is going to be a Doctor Strange 2. So, however it works out, I think Loki will probably end on some manner of cliffhanger. But clearly, Waldron, the writer, knows enough to know that Loki, his Loki, character will still be around to do a season 2. So, but beyond that, it's hard to say.
That is the most powerful man on the planet, aside from maybe Kevin Feige.
Yeah, I think at this point he might be the most powerful figure in the MCU, second only to Kevin Feige.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that's my theory. But what were you wanting to say? Because you were building up to something.
Oh, I mean, I was just it wasn't even anything like as well thought out as what you had. It was really just kind of speculating about how Loki is actually going to set up multiverse. And they explained it that they had the multiverse of war before the sacred timeline was set up. Um, whether the timeline is destroyed by Lady Loki slash the Hooded Figure or the Timekeepers themselves. Either way could be really interesting, but I'm wondering if, for the sake of longevity, if Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness is just going to kind of wrap up all the multiverses back into a single timeline with a neat little bow, just so we can have that Spider-Man multiverse thing, that Spider-Verse thing that a lot of people want. But then, for future stories, it's a little bit more linear and easier to do.
Yeah, if I had to guess, that's what I would guess would happen. I think that Doctor Strange 2 is going to end with Strange managing to, to solve the crisis, redeem Scarlet Witch, and collapse the multiverse into a single, truly continuous universe and continuous timeline.
So here's the greater question though. Is, if he collapses all the multiverses, does it return to the sacred timeline, or do all of them merge into one conglomerate timeline?
I
So we
think,
end up in an MCU universe where we have like the X-Men and
right.
all three Spider-Men and
I think
whatever
that's
else.
I think that's very possible because here's why I wouldn't bet on returning it to the sacred timeline, because I strongly suspect that by the end of this, season of Loki, we're going to learn that the sacred timeline isn't actually that sacred.
Yeah.
Here's my bet for one of, if not the big twist of Loki, is that the timekeepers are not benevolent protectors who merely keep the timeline flowing as it's supposed to. They've actually been guiding it and picking winners and losers throughout history, and they enforce what they think history ought to be with their time variance authority. And
That
so,
that would explain all the propaganda.
mhm.
And that was also I don't remember where this came in. I don't know if it was Loki asking Mobius or if it was in the actual like Miss Minutes presentation or what, but there was a question about like what do the timekeepers do now
Yeah,
after
yeah,
the TVA was
in the
established,
trial, yeah.
and they keep the flow of time. But
Mhm.
they've already like created the sacred timeline. Why are they still like protecting it? And also, if they
Exactly.
are protecting it, why are these like deviations able to occur at all?
Yeah, and also I've seen this pointed out, and I picked up on it a little bit watching it myself, but I noticed it more, just reading out the episode afterwards, is that when you watch the credits, because they sneak a lot of clues about these shows into the end credit sequences,
Oh yeah.
and there's a ton of them in this Loki end credit sequence. And one of the best observations I've read about is you notice that there's a lot of documents featured in the end credit scenes, like a lot of files, paperwork, documents, and stuff, and a lot of it is redacted. Now you think to yourself, the TVA is an omnipotent organization. They are not being held accountable by any public or private body or entity. Who are they redacting these documents for? Why is there information that is not only
Or is
redacted
there
but
someone
heavily
redacting
redacted?
the documents for them?
Well, that well that
Maybe at the
well
timekeepers.
that's what I'm thinking. Is I think that these records are being manipulated to conceal a darker truth. You know, maybe by the timekeepers, maybe by some even higher force, like the one who remains, who was in the comics he's this figure who was the final essentially time TVA agent at the very end of the timeline, who went back to the beginning and recreated the TVA from the start, to protect the sacred timeline. Essentially acted as a kind of timekeeper, but he's even above the timekeepers.
I
um
thought I thought he was like a celestial or something.
Actually, yes, I think he is a celestial, but that was the basic story: is
Yeah,
existed at
yeah.
the end of time, went back to the beginning, created the time variance authority. um and so who's redacting these documents? What information is being concealed? I mean, this is an omnipotent organization. And so, yeah, I think that's going to be a twist. I think that the timekeepers are going to be very different than how they were presented here in episode 1. And again, I'm desperately curious to know who Richard E. Grant is going to be playing, because again, that's a really big actor, and we didn't get a whiff of him in this episode.
Yeah.
So he's got to be tied into this conspiracy somehow. So I'm really interested to see how he factors in to all this.
Yeah, at this point I feel like he has to be one of the timekeepers.
Yeah. Which, if he is, that would give us 2 out of the 3. We know Jonathan Majors is Kang. If Richard E. Grant is another, then we might actually get name actors for all 3 timekeepers, which would be interesting. We know Kang is going to actually factor into the story with Ant-Man 3, but for the
Yeah.
others, it's not really clear where they might go. So we'll see. But yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting.
Ugh. The implications that this show has are astounding.
That
You
they
you
are.
said you said it was like more of an event series than the other two. And it's larger in scope where it encompasses the whole MCU.
Yeah.
I think it's more than that. I think it will literally change the entire MCU.
Oh yeah, without a
Like the
doubt.
foundations of it.
It already has. Just by the existence of this Loki variant, it already very much has. So, you know,
Oh yeah, that's the thing I want to ask. Um, do you think the characters in the MCU have free will? Because the show would suggest that they do, considering it's possible to have time variance.
right,
And the way the Miss Minutes presentation framed it was that like, you could just make a decision that's like the wrong decision.
right. Like you could show up late for work when you weren't supposed to, and
Yeah.
that could mark you as a deviant. So, in that sense, yes. If you have the power to make the wrong choice, then I suppose you do have free will. But at the same time, I mean,
If all your
everything.
if all your other choices are being snipped at the branch by the
Right.
timekeepers, then you really don't have free will. You have the
Exactly.
ability to choose, but you only exist in the choices that are deemed worthy.
Acceptable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which would mean you don't have free will. So if the characters don't have free will, how is it that they're able to deviate from the
Yeah,
path in
yeah.
the first
It's
place?
yeah, it's a major paradox. I think that I think it's just as you were saying. There is a spectrum of acceptable choices that you could make. You're free to make a choice, and you may even have lots of choices, but you have to make a choice within these boundaries. If you step outside those boundaries, then you're a deviant and you have to be destroyed.
Yeah.
But you are free to make a choice within this range. Just don't go outside of that. And so yeah, I think it is free will up until a point. But again, it does beg the question, are the timekeepers is the timeline truly sacred, or are the timekeepers picking winners and losers? Because they even say, why weren't the Avengers as big of time criminals as Loki is? I mean, they time traveled and messed up a lot of stuff and changed a lot of stuff.
But
But of
they
course,
were supposed to, or that
they
was
were
supposed to
supposed
happen?
to, whereas Loki was not supposed to deviate up from what he was supposed to do, even though he only was able to do what he did because the Avengers messed with the timeline in the first place.
Yeah, and if the Avengers were supposed to go to 2012 New York, that means they were supposed to mess up, causing Loki to be a deviant.
Right.
And then, but it's weird because you expect that the only reason he's a deviant is because he stole the Infinity Stone, and then that caused that branch, because
Right.
that stone couldn't really be returned to its point in time where it needed to be. But the show also suggests that there are other ways to become a deviant
Right.
other than that specifically. And the only reason that happened is because something that was deemed supposed to happen happened anyways, which like repeats the cycle of like, how are deviants even a thing?
Yeah.
Unless, you know, the the timekeepers are not omniscient. There's a man behind the curtain, and the three of them are just
Deciding what is and isn't
yeah,
correct.
choosing
Exactly. Yeah. And I genuinely think that's going to be one of, if not the twist of the show. But I will say this, I know that the time travel logic of the MCU is intentionally messy so that it can create plot threads that we could pull on in shows like Loki. Like I get that. And also it's a convenient way to get to the multiverse. But a big part of me, both in Endgame and since, yeah, has wished that I wish just we could just stick to Back to the Future rules. They even reference Back to the Future rules in Endgame, but
Yeah.
they explain why we can't have that. But I never really bought it. Back to the Future rules. It's clean. It's simple. Everything exists on a line. If you go back and change something, it alters the future, and history just erases the anomaly from existence.
Well,
Simple as
I
that.
I think the reason they couldn't do that is specifically because they wanted to set up the multiverse theory,
Exactly.
where
Yeah.
it's each, which Back to the Future 2 actually does. The logic of Back to the Future 2 is different from Back to the Future 1
Hmm.
because it, creates that alternate branch, if you remember, like the whiteboard
Exactly.
diagram.
Yeah.
But I think the Avengers time travel logic would have been sound if it were not for Old Man Cap.
Yeah.
That
Which
made no sense.
there's no way that by the TVA's own logic, he's not a major time criminal because yes, he went back and returned all the stones. That's good. But then he went back to an alternate 1945 and lived out his entire life there. There's
And
no
it's
way he
still,
didn't change anything along the way, and then came back to this original timeline to give Sam the shield, and then presumably went back again. So there's no way he's not a major time criminal.
yeah. I think honestly, what they should have done is instead of having Old Man Captain America show up on the bench, they should have just had him teleport back. Like that would have
Yeah,
been so much simpler. It wouldn't have prevented the thing. Just have him teleport back and he's an old man. And like he
yeah,
takes
yeah.
off the helmet and he's old and they're like, "Oh my God, what happened?" You
It's
weren't
true.
supposed to take that long. And he's like, "I decided to live my life and live my life out the way I wanted it to." And like that would have had the same emotional impact and it wouldn't have entirely fucked up the the rules of time travel for the MCU.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree. That would have been a little bit better way to do it. But again, like I said, I mean, I understand why it has to work in the way it worked because it opens up the door to create all these different threads that make shows like Loki possible, and I'm sure will make Doctor Strange 2 possible, and all this different stuff. So
Yeah.
it's a necessity of the broader MCU story, but I just wish it were a little bit cleaner. But hey, we have the TVA to clean it up for us now. So
And they literally have an in-universe explanation for retconning things.
exactly,
So, they can.
literally.
So that's the thing I always, you know, I never really got into the Marvel comics. I've read
Mhm.
like maybe two comics. Part of the reason is because I don't know where to start. I
Mm.
can't just start from the beginning because, there's years and years and years of material for
Decades.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, literal decades of material for, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of different heroes. It's like, where do
Mhm.
you start? And on top of that, they've messed up their own continuity so many times that they've like restarted, different Marvel universes. And it's just my biggest fear for the MCU is that they go down that same path where they
Mhm.
make it too overly complicated and then they have to reboot, restart, whatever.
Right.
And
Well.
that's why I'm afraid of the multiverse. I think it has a
Mhm.
lot of potential. A lot of people are super excited by it. I'm just worried that down the road it's going to get too out of hand and
And
like
and and
too large in scope.
Yeah, and that's a fair concern, but I think if that does happen, it won't happen for a long time because you would need to get really deep into it before you can't even. It's like traveling through a tunnel. It would have to be a very long, very deep tunnel before you got so far into it that you couldn't see back out where you came from,
Yeah.
and you can't see where you're going either. So I think that's a risk, but if that does happen, it won't happen for a long time. And here's my advice to you: if you ever are interested in getting into it, um, don't worry about any of that. Like just I'll tell you what I did. Because I mean, they've been printing out new issues almost weekly for decades for so many of these storylines. So you can't worry about where do I start, because there truly is no correct answer. What I did was I just picked a character or a storyline I was interested in, and I just picked the volume or the collection that I thought either looked recent or looked interesting, or it was one that I expressly knew was a good one. Like the first one I went to was Civil War II. It's a
Yeah,
big iconic
that's
storyline.
probably where I would start. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and it was great. And yeah, I looked for characters that I was interested in, and I did some light research on which storylines were which, and what was older, what was more recent, and kind of that kind of thing. But beyond that, I didn't worry about going back to Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man #1, because like we get it, after how many decades do you kind of
The story's been
start
told
to
to death. Yeah.
exactly, like you get the idea of Peter Parker, so you just want to get to the recent stuff, and the really kind of major events. And so that's what I would recommend if you ever are trying to get into it, is don't worry about any of where do I start. Just jump into a particular storyline you're interested in, or a particular character, and if it speaks to you, great. And if not, you have hundreds of other options, because there's so many different character arcs, story arcs, issue collections, yada yada yada. You can't go wrong. So
Yeah.
if you're not into it, just try another one. And so yeah, that was Loki's glorious purpose. Which of course, the message of the episode is Loki is very much disabused of his glorious purpose by the end. I will say that was a great emotional beat, just watching Loki when he's by himself in the Time Theater, just watching out how his storyline was supposed to have played out. Because it tugs at your heartstrings when you are a big Marvel fan, because it just brings that nostalgia rushing back, because we of course did go with Loki on that whole adventure, and we did follow him all throughout, the original Thor to the original Avengers to Thor 2 and Ragnarok and Infinity War. And it did hurt a bit. It hurt a lot when
Yeah.
Thanos killed him like it was nothing. So
Yeah, and I think especially, that scene was really easy to relate to. I think especially for the younger people and our generation, where, we're still in school and we're trying to figure out what to do with our lives. And the big question that at least I'm always asking myself is, am I on the right path?
mhm,
Am I doing what I'm supposed to do, what I can do? Am I fulfilling my potential? Am I on the right path? And to see kind of the heartbreak that Loki goes through, realizing that no, he's not on the right path, and he never will be,
exactly.
is
But that's the thing,
it's
though, is that
saddening, it's terrifying, it's
it, it it's both true, and also there's more to it than that, because it's true. Loki, he sees how the rest of his life is supposed to play out, including all the other terrible things that he does in Thor: The Dark World, and events leading to his mother's death and all that. But he also sees that by the end of his life, he does have this heroic turn, and he dies trying to be a hero. And I think that's going to be a big part of his emotional journey as well, is you know he has to like warp speed from 2012 evil Loki to being that sympathetic heroic figure, without the instead of the 5-6 years in between, he has 5 episodes to do
yeah,
that, because that's the point he wants to get to. He wants to redeem himself. He's already come to grips with the fact that, yes, death and destruction has followed him everywhere he's gone, but it doesn't have to be that way. And he after seeing how his story ends with him trying unsuccessfully to be a hero, now he has a chance as this Loki deviant to actually act as more of a hero. Not he's still Loki, so he won't be completely unselfish, but he'll be I suspect by the end of Loki, he'll be a Loki that's far more similar to end of Ragnarok, Infinity War Loki than he is Loki from where he's coming from in Avengers. You know,
Yeah.
he'll kind of rush through all of that character development to get to a very similar place by the end of this series as he did from the first Thor to Infinity War.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, indeed. Well, so I think that's Loki.
Yeah, I think that just about covers it. I mean,
Or at least it will be, because we're hoping to do, we're both going to be watching this show very closely, and I
oh
know we're
yeah.
hoping to do a mid-season review and also an end-of-season review where we're going to recap everything. So stay tuned for lots more Loki content, because yeah, this is going to be the show to watch over the summer. I am convinced.
Yeah, it's the next big thing, and I mean, I can't say anything other than I'm excited.
Yeah, extremely excited. This is big. This is, yeah, yeah, Loki is going to be something else. I'm really excited for the next 5 episodes, and I'm excited to come back and rewatch this episode to see how many of our theories came true. Because
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that
if we're right about the timekeepers not being who they say they are and end up being the villains, if that's a surprise twist, you have to subscribe.
yeah, that's the
You, the
deal. It's
viewer, have to
official now.
subscribe. That's
Contractually obligated.
Yeah, we will legally sue you if you do. That's a
Exactly.
joke. We will, for legal reasons, this is a joke.
If you've watched through if you've watched this long throughout the episode, then yeah, I think at this
First of
point
all,
you're
thank you.
yes.
Congrats.
Yes, absolutely. We
Unless
appreciate it
we're
very
on in the
much.
background, but that's okay too.
Well, still, yeah, they as long as you made it here, thank you very much. But also, you are contractually obligated now to subscribe if any of our theories from this episode are proved to be correct.
Or if you like our content and
Oh,
want to
yeah,
see our next episodes
that's
for
also
the
a good reason.
mid-season and finale.
Absolutely, yes. I think that's also a good reason. Either reason would be acceptable.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning into another episode of Observation Conversations. I've been Reid.
And I've been Jonathan.
And we'll see you next time. Good night.
We will see you in another timeline.
Ah.